Good afternoon and welcome to the informational meeting of Tuesday, October 25th. We do have a quorum of members present. We will now move on to committee and commission reports. We have the Homeless Task Force from Monday, October 24th, 2022. Councilor McCurris.
Thank you, Chairman. We had a Homeless Task Force meeting yesterday where we reviewed our draft recommendations that we're preparing for the City Council and the Mayor. And I would expect the Council will receive a report in about 2 weeks. We've got our potentially our final meeting on November 7th. We've prepared about 3 or 4 specific recommendations for the Council to consider and some other issues that the Council needs to be aware of. And so I think there's been good work done so far. There's continuing to be trying to unite together and agree on some tactical actionable things. But after November 7th, this group can expect to see some specific things to review.
Thank you for that report. All right, we'll move on now to councilor remarks. Does anyone have councilor remarks? Okay, seeing none, I do have one announcement. Just tomorrow morning at 7:30 is the Breakfast Club. We'll be meeting, so if you have anything, check our schedule. It has all the related information there. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention. Councilor Sale wanted me more specifically too. So we will start off with our first presentation of the day, the Zoo, Butterfly House, and Aquarium update. We will have Becky come up and she will start. She's the president and CEO of the Great Plains Zoo.
Hi, we have a presentation too that I think will get keyed up. Sorry, we'll get it keyed up. How are you guys today?
Great, thank you.
Good. Audrey does send her best. Unfortunately, she's just not feeling well, so she could not be with us today, but I'm sure she'd entertain questions from any of the counselors should anyone want to reach out to her directly. Well, we have exciting news to share, and so while Don gets that pulled up, I'll just start with a little bit of history as to what we've been working on. For over the last year and a half, nearly, we have been having conversations with the Butterfly House and Aquarium about how we can be stronger together. Much of this all started in 2020 when the zoo and the Butterfly House began to work together as it related to educational programming, some cross-marketing promotional items, as well as just conservation work. We, as the zoo, started working with the Dakota skipper, which is a small indigenous butterfly that is native to South Dakota, considered to be extrapolated from our prairie landscape right now. And who better than the Butterfly House to lean in and help us out as it relates to butterflies? Thank you. Perfect. So as you can see, we do look at this as a merger of our two organizations becoming stronger together. Little history on the Butterfly House itself. So it was opened in 2002 as the Sertoma Butterfly House. The aquariums were added in 2011. The Butterfly House exists in Sertoma Park, which is a lease and a sublease with both the City of Sioux Falls as well as South Dakota Game and Fish and Parks. The Zoological Society of Sioux Falls was founded in 1957. The zoo opened in its current location in 1963. And as many of you know, we have a current management contract with the City of Sioux Falls that is reviewed on an annual basis, 5-year basis, which we just renewed it last year. One of the things I wanted to bring forward to you is just the synergies as they relate to our mission statements. And so as you can see in front of you, we have inspiring conservation of the vital building blocks of the sea, sky, and land, which is the mission statement for the Butterfly House and Aquarium. And for the zoo, we just went through strategic planning last year, and we revised our mission statement to say, creating connection and protecting the natural world. And so much of our work really got serious starting in November of last year. And so we formed our exploration committee, which was represented by 2 board members of each respective board for our organization. And we also had the 2 CEOs, as well as we hired a third-party facilitator to walk us through the exercise of due diligence, which led into negotiations. Due diligence being the great bulk of what we looked at for the first 6 months through this process. Beginning in March of 2022, after we determined there was no deal breaker, we decided to move into negotiations. Now, this is a friendly merger of 2 equals, not the same as an acquisition. So as it relates to nonprofit organization mergers, it's just a little bit different of a process of what you would see otherwise. And so in September of just this last year, on the 27th, both of our board of directors unanimously voted to merge our two organizations to become effective as one organization as of January of 2023. So as I mentioned earlier, it was really looking at those synergies of how we can be stronger together. We also looked very much in-depthly at our educational programming. Both of us are sought-after destinations as it relates to quality education in our community. The zoo and the Butterfly House is only limited in our education by space. We at the zoo have added some picnic shelters and other things for our zoo camp, and we have sold out again this year. So we've sold out all of our zoo camp spots for the last 2 years. The Butterfly House is using a former storage room and converting it to a classroom for the summer to do their camp programs. So we know that if we just had space, we would serve a lot more people together. Conservation opportunities, as we look at actually fulfilling our mission to save animals from extinction, it's very important that we make sure that everything we do together is in lockstep with our mission, and we see a lot of opportunities both locally as well as globally. Our employee attraction and retention, this is a very big deal to us as an organization, is we want to make sure that we're an employer of choice. Oftentimes when we're a smaller organization like what the Great Plains Zoo is, we have people come to our zoo who want to get experience in a zoo world type application, and then they launch pad to a destination that's closer to home or with a species that they're looking to work with, and we want to be the place that people launch to, not come get experience and leave. So employee retention and attraction is highly important as part of this merger process. And then ultimately, it's our community. It's that year-round regional destination, improving the quality of life for the citizens of Sioux Falls, as well as attracting more tourists to our community. We know that Sioux Falls is not just a gas stop anymore on the way to the west. We have people stopping, enjoying a couple days, and we want to be part of that attraction list so that people spend multiple days in our great community. And we feel we can do that quite well. And then workforce, as I mentioned earlier. So the need. Through the community, we have found that our community desperately wants to have a larger aquarium. Most of you know that the aquarium project at the Butterfly House has been ongoing for a number of years now. It is limited in terms of the amount of space that they can use to build out their aquarium based on flood mitigation and regulations in that area of Sertoma Park. Whereas at the zoo, we do anticipate having a larger campus and can build a larger aquarium. Educational programming, as I already mentioned, is at capacity, and we know that we can do a lot more together. Access for all individuals, we really look at our zoo and the aquarium as being a place for all people, all ages, all abilities, and just further maximizing how we can achieve that. The year-round family opportunities, I feel like this is hard to even measure. How many people will enjoy coming to this type of destination year-round? And as we look at our community, and I've talked to Don Kearney obviously a lot through this process, I know that that is something that is heard within the park system and the city all the time. People want more indoor opportunities for recreation year-round. Full-day destination, we don't want to make people choose. It's not going to be Butterfly House or the zoo. Just come and spend the day with us and enjoy the entire day. And then that workforce retention as well. And so, as we worked through this access programs, I did want to highlight that because it is something very important to all to make sure that the affordability to access the zoo and the aquarium is something that all can achieve. So we reimagined our Zoo for All program just this last year. And so instead of it being an application type process, we looked at making sure it was a very turnkey style process, a very dignified process for any person to be able to utilize it. They do obviously have to have some type of state funding to qualify for the program. It's $3 for an adult, $1 for a child. You can come as many times as you want. And right now, as of today, it's over 2,500 that we've had just this year alone. So we know this is a far better reaching program than what we had in the past. Butterfly House has been working with their Aquarium for All project for quite some time. They do have memberships incorporated with theirs, over 1,000 daily missions as well. We are looking at that membership component. I'm one that I want to crawl before I walk, walk before I run. And I would say next year, as we look at our Zoo for All program, it is very important for us to look at expanding that to the tri-state region because citizens from Iowa and citizens from Minnesota are asking to have the same access as what we did for the citizens of South Dakota. And the timeline, unfortunately, this did get a little wonky when I converted it. I apologize. So as you look at that, the first one is the merger is effective starting on the 1st of January. That is going to be bringing together our 2 board of directors. We are going to rename our board of directors. We will maintain the EIN, which is associated with the management contract we currently have. So instead of being the Zoological Society of Sioux Falls, we are renaming to be more inclusive of both of those features within our zoo and aquarium business model as the Sioux Falls Zoo and Aquarium Board of Directors. We will currently operate on the 2 campuses until we can plan and build to be on 1 campus. There's natural inefficiencies of having the 2 campus operations, so we do want that to be relatively quick, that we can bring together and have all of our staff on 1 location. So until that time, we are still maintaining the DBA for the Butterfly House and Aquarium, as well as the DBA for the Great Plains Zoo. 2023, so coming next year, we are looking at bidding out lions next month. And so that's very exciting for us to move ahead on that project. And then we are starting to look at that educational center component as to being one of the first things we would build out to better serve our community. Ideally, and we know we're ambitious, we'd like to start constructing a butterfly experience as well as an aquarium in 2024. Maybe late in 2024, but we are very dedicated to trying to get together as quickly as possible, as well as the staff spaces that we would need to sustain the operations of this type of a zoo and aquarium business model. And our grand opening, hopefully, by late 2025, we can be the Sioux Falls Zoo and Aquarium for all to come and enjoy. Here's a little bit of a timeline of our bright future and our bold vision for that. It does achieve more than just the aquarium. We are really looking at this as being reinvigorating of our zoo campus itself. So we like to call it rejuvenation. What we have found through our studies is this just really sets us on a very successful trajectory to address some of our aged infrastructure and have the capital we would need to reinvest into our campus. So we did work with Zoo Advisors, who is now recently rebranded as Canopy Strategic Partners. And we first looked at, beginning in November of last year, is this operationally feasible? Can we sustain an operation of a zoo and aquarium business model in our community of this size, and can it be affordable? And so as we looked through all that process, we took 3 years of data from both Butterfly House and the zoo to analyze all of the information and determine whether or not we were sustainable. And ultimately, Canopy said the merger will very likely result in higher earning and sustainable operations, while at the same time offering a richer experience for visitors and an increase in the organization's ability to impact conservation education mission. However, there's a strong caveat that also accompanies this. We can't just build an aquarium and assume everything will be wonderful and rosy afterwards. We have to continuously plan for our business, look at trends, make sure we're meeting the needs of our community. So without future improvements to the guest experience and business strategies, the net income generated by the organization is likely to tail off. So as I show you some of the graphs, it shows that tail off. But that's kind of assuming that we would set it and forget it, and we certainly will not do that. And so as we look at the attendance projections, we currently have almost 90,000 visitors at Butterfly House and Aquarium. We have over 250,000 that do attend the zoo. Now, we did use some science within Canopy Strategic Partners that they could use cell phone data and determine what is that overlap of our 2 clientele mixes and how many will we potentially cannibalize through this merger. And what we had found is there is overlap, but it's more so as it relates to the zoo visitors going to Butterfly House, not as much as the butterfly visitors coming to the zoo attendance mix. So that was weighted and it counted for through our accounting methods as projected above. So we do anticipate 25% growth by the year 2031 with over 400,000 in attendance. I do want to specify what those 3 lines mean. So as we looked at this, we did a conservative model, an aggressive model, and then a moderate model right in the middle. We chose to kind of stick with the moderate model as we did our business analysis. There's some natural conservative aspects into our inputs that we provided for the entire analysis in general. For instance, the aquarium that we are looking at could be upwards of 25,000 square feet. Canopy had just recently finished doing a feasibility study on the Aquarium of Niagara, which is approximately the same size. However, it's an older facility and has some natural inefficiencies just due to its age. However, that was the data we used as part of our input, which I think is valuable for our analysis of whether or not this is feasible. So we do anticipate having a 56% growth in the off-peak attendance, which is really talking to that year-round indoor recreation opportunity. There is naturally a peak season and an off-peak season. People like to go outside in the summer, not so much in the winter. So there's naturally some of that we will see, as well as just the tourist populations that come to our state in the summertime. And so then as we look at the revenue, 2024 is when we anticipated the aquarium to be viable. So that's where you see the major increase in our revenue projections. But together, we are expected to be the biggest driver of this increased operating revenues over the next decade, is bringing this all together and the planned infrastructure updates as well. So top line financials, and this is where you can start to see that the profitability margin starts to close on itself. But again, that's not assuming any business strategies and things that we would certainly do through our normal operation business strategic planning. But what we have is the ability to be more profitable. So as modeled, the merger creates a path towards a stable basis for operations of a new and compelling experience in Sioux Falls. This model includes the new exhibit or an improvement to an existing exhibit every 1 to 2 years throughout 2030, which helps keep the experience fresh and bolsters that growth in attendance and revenues. It also just reinvigorates what our zoo and aquarium can mean to our community. We know we're a beloved gem, but we think that we can better serve our community, our animals, and our staff through this merger. We looked at some of our economic impact, and so as we did this, we took kind of the historic zoo's economic impact, and then we added that together as what that new model would allow us to achieve. And so through this, we have over $340 in direct spending of our new organization, which includes nearly $54 million, almost $55 million in future capital expenditures, the operating expenditures of nearly $84 million, and then what our off-site spending could potentially reach with our patrons coming to see us. And so these are very strong numbers. It is over a 10-year period, but it does show again that there's good science behind the plan. This is where you can see it broken down each year by some type of project also coming online to help us solidify our financial growth. And again, it's a bold vision for a bright future, and something that Audrey and I have worked very hard on over the last year and a half. I cannot thank our board of directors enough in believing in this idea, being willing to explore the idea. A lot of meetings, a lot of conversations, some difficult conversations, but ultimately together we know we are stronger together. So I would entertain any questions at this time.
Thank you very much for your presentations. Are there any questions? Councilor Bronco.
Thank you for that presentation. I think this is a terrific idea. I think it has the potential to be a wonderful synthesis and really add something to the community, obviously. I am curious about what's the vision for the existing plant, the existing Butterfly House post-merger.
Sure. So those conversations are occurring with Don Kearney and the park staff. There's been a number of tours as well with the park board members looking at that building and determining how to best utilize that building. So I would have to refer to Don to see if there's more detail you'd like to add.
Well, actually, Becky summed it up pretty good. We've been going through the building. Our staff have been brainstorming about how that potentially could be used. And as Becky said at the start of her presentation, indoor recreation space is something that the city's told us through our community surveys that they want to see more of. And so we're not at the point where we really have a recommendation for how that would be repurposed. But as Becky mentioned, it's a couple years down the road before they'll actually vacate that site. So we've got a little time, but certainly want to try to get as much value out of that for the community as we possibly can.
I think that's critical. I'm glad you're studying it.
Okay, are there any other questions? Councilor Starr.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Director Kearney, I guess more budget numbers, how we, because we have a limited amount in our capital improvement program for the next 5 years. With the merger, with the probably a capital campaign to build and going down that road, operationally, we're about 2.1 million into the zoo each year, but we've only allocated for the next 5 years about, well, not only, but it's about 722,000, so 750,000. That's not going to get us there, is it? I mean, we're going to have to make some major additions to get us to where the plan that we just had described to us, aren't we?
Yeah, I think the zoo's done an incredible job getting over the finish line with Lions, an $8 million project, with more projects to come in the future. Certainly anticipate in the next 5 years that we'll have to really look at trying to make additional investments in the zoo to be able to help them advance. Obviously, we'll rely on them heavily, for additional fundraising as they've come together with both boards. And I think the stronger together applies not only with the actual operational aspects of the zoo, but also the ability, because I think people like when people partner together versus doing the same mission in two different ways. And so coming together, I think, will allow them to help raise more money, and people are willing to invest in that when they know there's a partnership going on there.
So other than the HIVAC system that we've planned for, what's missing in the bones? I know we added some emergency updates with some sewer and some infrastructure things. I guess, do we have an overall view of what's needed to get the bones of the facility so that it'll support an expansion and that part of it? So, I mean, as a city, we've done a great job lately, and a lot of departments kind of taking a look at where do we need to go. Do we have that? I hate using the word master plan, but maybe an inventory of what we're at and where the things people don't see that no one wants to invest in.
Yeah. It's actually one of the weaknesses of the historical improvements that have been out there. We don't have really good mapping, to be honest with you. And so a lot of times when we find a problem, that's usually how we discover where the actual line was put in, because the development has happened over so many decades. And there's some old infrastructure. And so I know Becky would agree with me that while we're trying to do the new and fun stuff, but we're also trying to take care of the infrastructure as well. The sewer line is something that you had mentioned that we certainly need to address. Backup generators we're working on, and so we're getting there, but it's going to take a little while to make it all happen. But it's a perfect opportunity to do that as we make improvements that Becky's outlined for us.
Okay. I guess just as a way to wrap up, I want to make sure that we have, it seems like an aggressive timeline with the information and getting the bones part of it, and like any organization, balancing the fun stuff that people see, but making sure that we have the infrastructure needs in place. And so very supportive of moving forward with this project. I just want to make sure that we take never a proponent of slowing things down, but at the same time, making sure that we have the infrastructure things that we need in place. And it belongs to the citizens of Sioux Falls. And we've gone away from maybe funding it as well as we should have through the years, and making that case that the city as an owner does our part and make our investment. So, and I think I've seen that change just in the couple of years that I've been here. And so hopefully that's something we can take a look at moving forward to make sure that infrastructure is in place.
Thank you, Councilor Starr.
Thank you.
Councilor Neitzer.
Thank you. First of all, am I recalling correctly, was the Butterfly House already actively fundraising for an expansion, and they have the blessing to move that money towards this project? And if so, how much was that?
Yes, you're accurate with that. So they had raised over $5 million. $1 million has been invested into the Butterfly House building currently, and that's all the new admin expansion that occurred a few years ago, as I understand it. But there is 4.2 remaining of those funds, and we have talked to the respective donors and made sure that they felt comfortable with that funds being utilized on the new aquarium project. Additionally, as we look at what that aquarium could look like, I think we have a great opportunity to honor the donor intent and make sure that we have a gallery-style wing, which would have been comparable to the expansion as planned at the Butterfly House, and honor the donor intent of all those funds received.
Okay. When I've been at, I remember I was at, I think it was the bear exhibit grand opening, and they showed the sneak preview, and they showed the lion as kind of the teaser. When you look at some of these, we have some individuals in our community that are incredibly generous, that made very large donations to the bears, and they've done it to some other things.
Right.
So some of your, without naming names, some of your marquee, I guess, or some of your biggest contributors, are they excited and totally on board with wanting to support this sort of thing too?
Yes. Without giving too many more details, because I'm a little too early in the
No,
stages
I'm
of
not
that,
asking for any
but
teases,
yes.
but yeah.
We're overwhelmingly, as we talk to donors as well as just community citizens, I hear one thing over and over again. It just makes sense. And that's what we hear resoundingly. I think the donors that we've spoken to see this as a great opportunity to achieve an aquarium that would be larger than what could have been dreamed at the current location of the Butterfly House, and something that we really can put our mark on as the city of Sioux Falls.
So, I mean, in short, the people that are already supportive of your mission very likely may be excited to contribute and support this. That's all.
Yes.
Awesome. Director Kearney would know this, but you probably know this too. We own the building and the land underneath it, the city does?
Yes.
Okay, so
All
we control
assets
it.
are owned by the city of Sioux Falls.
Okay.
Yeah, and we own the animals. However, many animals are not owned in zoos. It's just cooperative management through other AZA zoos and aquariums.
But with the Butterfly House, same story there?
No, because they're not an accredited association.
No, I mean, I'm sorry to interrupt, but do we own the building and the land at the Butterfly House?
There's a little bit different of an arrangement because the Butterfly House does have the asset of the building on their balance sheet, but then they lease the land through that arrangement with the city of Sioux Falls and the South Dakota Game and Fish.
Okay. Just want to say congratulations. Thanks to you and Audrey for your leadership. These are two incredible organizations, an asset to our community, and the synergy is really, really incredible.
I appreciate that.
Thanks.
I know she would have been very happy to be here tonight, so.
Thank you, Counselor Neitzer. Are there any other questions?
Can, if I
Counselor
could-
Stark,
Yep.
absolutely.
Nope, I just want to follow up a little bit with what Counselor Neitzer had asked then. So at some point, will you be asking the city to buy the building then in the park? Or what is kind of the thought process of what happens to the existing building? I'll bet the outdoor campus folks would love to have it, and the state could write us a really nice check to buy the facility, but what is the thought process?
I would say it's a lot of conversations at this point in time and evaluating what the best use of that building would be and to determine how to best honor the citizens of Sioux Falls with the use of that building. As it relates to buying the building, I don't know that that's necessarily an option. Should the city of Sioux Falls want to support this project and the build out of a new facility, I would look at that as a more viable opportunity than necessarily buying out the existing building.
So what does the I'm sorry, Director Kearney's got an answer
Yeah, come on.
before I jump.
Yeah, the current lease agreement says that upon termination of the lease, the building reverts to the city.
Okay.
So that's what we would anticipate happening, is that when the move to the actual zoo campus happens, the building reverts to the city. And I think Becky articulated pretty good that, they made some investments into that building. And so I think the ability for the city to help with future investments at the new site is how we envision that playing out.
Do you know the value that they're carrying on their balance sheet of the building at this point?
I don't, unless Becky does.
I know we evaluated it. It's been a while, so I'd hate to misquote.
Nope, that's fine.
It would have been evaluated through our due diligence review. I'm just not recalling that total amount off the top of my head.
Nope, totally makes sense. Was just double checking. I think that's it. I'm good.
Thank you,
Thanks.
Counselor Starr. Appreciate the questions. Any other questions? Well, thank you very much, Becky, for coming, and we hope Audrey gets better soon, and we would have loved to see her today. So thank you for your strong work and your presentation here today. We're gonna move on here to our next item, alcohol and video lottery regulation review by Counselors McCurris and Counselor Neitzer, with 20 minutes on the docket.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, fellow councilors. Thank you for giving Counselor Neitzer the opportunity tonight to talk about the topic of alcohol and video lottery regulation. I just want to kind of share some observations of what we're seeing and kind of kick off the conversation. There's For me, to be honest, I'm a rookie. I was new to this conversation over the last couple of months, not very familiar with it, but I've tried to dig in as deep as I can over the last 60 to 90 days to understand it better through conversations with legislatures, attorneys, people in our community, visits to the various places and things like that. Some things that I've been seeing of why we're here today from my perspective is two things from the city's perspective and then one overarching thing. First, it appears to me that from multiple visits to a variety of entities, it feels to me and appears to me that the current regulation in the city of Sioux Falls creates the opportunity for beverages from one licensed premise to easily transition to another licensed premise. So for example, if I'm in one licensed premise and I buy a beverage there, the way things are currently set up, it feels very easy that I just mosey over into another licensed premise with that same beverage and have some concerns about that and be inconsistent with the spirit of our regulations. The second thing is there's been a substantial increase in video lottery machine applications since 2019. You'll see a graph in a few moments about that, and really historically we've seen 10 machine units and 20 machine units, or 10 machine units, 2 next to each other, then to 20. Since 2019, we've seen that to go to 30 to 40 as more licensed premises have come next to each other since an ordinance change in 2019. And so I think it's just appropriate, at least when I reviewed the testimony from 2019, everything I heard was 2 licensed premises coming next to each other for employee safety. And then as I went out, it feels as though we're now into the 3 or 4 licensed premises next to each other. So just wanted to have a community conversation of, was that the intent of the regulation, or do we need to bring clarity so that there's clear intent moving forward? Those are the 2 things from the city perspective that I observed. The other thing that observed after digging in was just some confusion regarding state law. And after reading state law, I think people have come to different interpretations of what the state law means about different things. And so as we come to different interpretations, some have convictions over here, others have convictions over here, and it can potentially lead to more conflict and more issue as we look at license applications. So just wanted to have an open and honest community conversation about what is the appropriate understanding of the regulation that we have on the book. So those are just some observations of why I got involved and why we're having the conversation today. I wanted to clarify what the presentation is today and what it's not. We want to be really clear about this. This is not a commentary at all on the morality of video lottery or gambling. That we have not been discussing that. That's not on the table. Secondly, this is not a debate about whether video lottery should be legal. It's been legal in our state, it is a component of our state, and we're not presenting anything to the contrary of that. We are also not here today to talk about what should we do with existing facilities, should we go back, change. This is talking about what do we do moving forward when applications come in so we can all be on the same page of understanding and filtering through a similar thing. Today is a review of state law, just to share some information with you, and then you can go home, you can talk to your attorneys, you can talk to your people, whoever your people are, and see what conclusions that you arrive as well. Today is, though, a recognition that the number of video lottery machines and establishments are increasing in our community since 2019 at a rate that we have not seen previously. And so from our perspective, it's just important for us as community leaders to have a community conversation about it. And for us to have a community conversation about it, we think it starts with just learning and understanding the rules and the history of it. So the majority of the presentation today, Councilor Neitzert is going to take us through the history of it and the current regulations so that we can understand it, all in the spirit of saying, let's have a community conversation and see where it goes from there. So Councilor Neitzert, turn it over to you.
Thank you, Councilor McCorris. Thanks in advance to everybody for your patience. I'm going to go through this as quickly as possible, and we tried to balance getting enough information so that it's understandable, but it is complicated, but not being overly burdensome. We've had extensive conversations and numerous discussions with our city attorneys. We've sat down with them multiple times and with our licensing division talking about this, and they are here, and they're a resource now or later if you have questions. I want to thank them for their assistance or analysis and advice throughout this process and development of this presentation. This is a complicated subject, but we're going to try to boil it down. In 2008, the city created a zoning ordinance that required a separation distance of 2,000 feet from any video lottery establishment to a sensitive use. That law was challenged in 2011. That's called the Rick Law versus City of Sioux Falls decision. And that ordinance was struck down by the Supreme Court. And what they found there was that essentially the state had what they called preemption over video lottery. And what they said was, you only have authority to the extent that SDCL 427A64 gives you authority. That's the only section of state law that gives cities authority over video lottery. The problem with that particular ordinance was that it did not comply with that particular section. It did not exempt liquor license establishments from the ordinance, and state law says that we cannot restrict video lottery when they are inside of a liquor licensed establishment, and we'll get into that. Other jurisdictions have similar provisions that we wrote, except they do exempt liquor license establishments to comply with that particular section of state law. And since that decision, we have mostly taken a hands-off approach to video lottery over many, many years. All of my time on the council, we've, for the most part, just passed them thinking we don't necessarily have a whole lot of authority. So we're going to go over just a couple pieces of state law. The really only relevant sections are SDCL Chapter 35, alcoholic beverages, and 427A, which is state lottery, which includes video lottery provisions. And we're going to go over a couple of key provisions in there. So quick definition of terms. So one thing from the Chapter 35 is on sale. The sale of any alcoholic beverage for consumption only upon the premises where sold, which is important. And sale is the transfer for a consideration of title to any alcoholic beverage. This becomes important when we talk about any malt beverage establishments or any liquor establishments and video lottery, because you have to have an on-sale license to have video lottery. So an applicant must obtain a qualifying on-sale license before they can apply for video lottery machine placement, and these licenses are enumerated in Chapter 35. In short, you have to have either a liquor license, a wine, or a malt beverage license. You have to have one of those three before you can apply for video lottery, and they all have to be on sale. So a licensed establishment, if the business has a liquor license, we have very little authority to regulate them, and we'll show you why very shortly. But if they have a malt beverage or a wine license, we have more authority. And I want you to keep this distinction in mind as we go forward. The requirements, if you have a malt beverage or a wine license, there's more requirements in state law to have video lottery. And we have more latitude to control them. As where it relates to liquor licenses, we have very little authority, and they really have very little requirement, except that they just serve alcohol. That's about the only requirement. And so like a liquor establishment, for example, could be like Wiley's or Pave, just as an example. So SDCL 427A64, this is a one section of state law that gives us authority over video lottery, which the Supreme Court referenced in its decision. It says that in addition to considering suitable location and suitable person, which are the things you can consider when you approve alcohol, we are allowed to consider 6 extra factors, but only when it is a wine or a malt beverage licensed establishment. So if I'm an establishment that has wine or malt beverage and I would like to get video lottery, we are allowed to consider 6 more factors. And we did go over these in the past, but essentially it's pretty wide latitude. The number of establishments currently licensed in the community for video lottery, the proximity to other establishments with video lottery, how they propose to run their business, and a whole list of other things. We can consider these factors. So just as a little bit of comparison, just so you know, in terms of what is the composition right now, out there right now. Again, video lottery placement requires one of those 3 license types. Liquor licenses are limited and expensive, as you know. We only have so many with population, and they're over $250,000. Malt beverage and wine licenses are unlimited, and they're inexpensive. I think they're $500. The majority of video lottery placement is with malt beverage or wine licenses. 144 of them are with malt beverage or wine, and 66 are with liquor. Even more interesting, only 12 casinos, and when I say casino, their only use essentially is a casino, and they have a casino in their name. Only 12 of those have a liquor license. The rest, 121, have malt beverage or wine licenses. So the vast majority have malt beverage or wine, which means that we can therefore consider the extra 6 factors and regulate the majority of proposed video lottery establishments, the vast majority of which are casinos on a go-forward basis. Again, remembering that if you have video lottery, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're quote-unquote a casino. You could simply be a restaurant that has video lottery in it. So looking at other major cities, very interesting looking at this, and all of them reference that SDCL 427A64 as their empowering law to give them this ability. Rapid City caps at 75 video lottery placements. They grow with population, and they do a lottery to award those. Aberdeen is capped at 35. Mitchell's capped as of 2018. We didn't have the number available. Yankton is capped at 39. And Watertown capped in 1994. These all only apply, this is very important to note, they all only apply to wine and malt beverage alcohol establishments. So they cap the number of video lottery licenses that they will allow for wine and malt beverage establishments. Anybody who gets a liquor license and any new liquor license can get video lottery. The cities cannot limit that. So that's important to note, that even if you quote unquote cap, if you have a liquor license or we get more liquor licenses in the city, you can have another video lottery license. Restrictions on licensed establishments. Other than 427A64, this one right here is really, really important to take a look at. Those are the two sections of state law that are vital to understand. Restrictions on licensed establishment. It outlines the requirements the on-sale establishment must meet for video lottery placement. Again, these requirements do not apply to a licensed establishment with a liquor license. They do apply if you have malt beverage or wine. And the restrictions are, so this is the state law in italics. This is the pertinent section. So if you have a malt beverage or wine license, you must be a bar or a lounge. Quote, a business license pursuant to subdivisions, and this is wine or malt beverage, may not be a licensed establishment for video lottery placement pursuant to subdivision, and that's the definition of a licensed establishment, unless it is a bar or a lounge. If the business holding a malt beverage or wine license is not a bar or a lounge, it does not qualify for video lottery pursuant to state law based on that provision. So then it goes on to say, for the purposes of the section, a bar or lounge is an enterprise primarily maintained and operated for the selling, dispensing, and consumption of alcoholic beverages on the premises, and may also include the sale and service of food. The important portion here being primarily maintained and operated for the selling, dispensing, and consumption of alcoholic beverages. The Lottery Commission issues rulings, and the Lottery Commission oversees video lottery, and lottery in general. They issue rulings on occasion, and they give these for the proprietors and for local governments and other stakeholders. They issued a declaratory ruling in 1993, which has not been rescinded, that's called Location of Video Lottery Machines in Bars or Lounges, which provides more guidance, and they talk about that it's meant to give stakeholders more guidance on how to interpret that section of law. That requires a business with malt beverage or wine to be a bar or a lounge. So that ruling states in pertinent part, while video lottery machine placement and play may be an integral business component of the bar or lounge, which was defined in state law, the premises cannot be designed solely for video lottery machine placement and play. The ruling goes on to state that in order to qualify for a video lottery establishment license, it must also provide service and seating for the on-sale consumption of alcoholic beverages for patrons, and such seating within the bar or lounge must be available other than at video lottery machines and in relative proportion to the area reserved for machine placement. And I need to go back and say all of this applies if you have a malt beverage or wine license. If you have a liquor license, whether you're a restaurant with a liquor license or you're a bar, you don't have to meet any of these requirements. You don't have to have the seating, you don't have to have any of that. This only applies if you have malt beverage or wine licenses. So when you're evaluating the design and operation of a business, these are the factors that we think we could be looking at to determine whether or not the business with the malt beverage or the wine license is qualified for video lottery machine placement based on that section. Will the business sell alcohol versus giving it away? Is there dedicated seating for alcohol consumption? Is there seating provided other than at video lottery terminals? Is the seating and space dedicated for alcohol and or food consumption in proportion to the area dedicated to video lottery machine placement and play? And if you read the declaratory ruling, it talks about a number of these things. The next item is the 10 machine limit. All licensed establishments are limited to 10 machines. SDCL 427A44 reads, no more than 10 video lottery machines may be placed in any licensed establishment. The state legislature considers this every couple of years, and they've voted down an increase every time. They considered this a couple of years ago. There was a proposal to do 15. It was amended to 12, and it was defeated. And on record, what seems to be said is that they do not want to expand gambling. That's their reasoning. Many businesses have created, many casinos and businesses, and I use businesses kind of in quotes, have created multiple businesses, one per room, for example, where we're now seeing 20, 30, 40, or 50 machines with more requests that are forthcoming. And with each of these businesses, they have a separate alcohol license in the premises, in each room or area. But with the operation and open floor plan, if you go visit it, it feels like one large casino. This is a graph of machine approvals. This kind of gives you a bit of a historical perspective. And so in 2015 through 2018, there were less than 10 video lottery machine placement requests for the entire year. In 2019, when we changed the ordinance to be more flexible with openings, approval requests started increasing. 2019, there were 17. 2020, there were 19. 2021, 28. And year to date, we have 27 requests, and we have 14 on the docket on November 1st. So said another way, in 2015 to 2019, we added an average of 50 machines per year, and we're now adding 200 to 300 machines per year in the city. The third and final part is separate and distinct facilities. State law requires that alcohol establishments with this wine and malt beverage have separate and distinct facilities if they're in a multi-tenant building like a strip mall. And the portion of state law, again, this goes back to licensed establishment only applying to wine and malt beverage. A bar or lounge may be physically connected to another enterprise within the same building, which enterprise may be owned or operated by the same person. There may be interior access between a bar or lounge and connected enterprise. However, this is the important part, there shall be a floor-to-ceiling opaque wall separation between the two enterprises. A separation wall may be constructed to provide visual and physical access for employees from areas in the building not open to the public. The bar or lounge shall have a separate entrance and exit. The Lottery Commission goes on and they have another ruling where they talked about this, and this was a pertinent part which kind of gives color to that particular law. The rules are concomitant with the legislative intent that restricts a licensed establishment to no more than 10 machines within the same legally described premises licensed for the on-sale consumption of alcoholic beverages. The rules are also consistent with the legislative intent to prohibit a casino-type atmosphere, they put casino-type in quotes, by the imposition of the 10-machine limit for a licensed establishment. So then in 2019, we added an allowance to allow for openings that were inaccessible to the public, trying to be in harmony with state law, limited to doorway width for employees only, and allowance for 2 licensed premises to share a cooler if alcohol was physically separated, for example, with a fence. Before, we required a solid wall, no exception. This still maintained the requirement for separate entrances and exits and allowed for a common atrium entrance into, let's say, we'll call it license A and B. The ordinance, again, was trying to provide some flexibility for the businesses, but comply with state law. But the observation of actual implementation, having visited a lot of newer casinos and just, not even casinos, also restaurants that have gotten additional licenses, we see greater than 2 premises sharing coolers, employee-only openings are clearly visible and they're accessible to customers where somebody can walk through them, and visual separation is not being maintained. And unfortunately, alcohol is moving between the premises. So it's just been implemented in ways that were never intended. So just almost done here. This is a quick example of what we saw in the past, which is essentially you'd have a casino where you'd have 2 licenses and 2 businesses with a solid wall. We'll call it business A and B. There'd be a separate door going into each, or you'd have a vestibule in the front and there was a door going into A and B, but you had a solid wall. It was separate and distinct. Alcohol couldn't move between facilities. What you're seeing now with the 2019 ordinance change is, or this was the intent, I should say. This was the 2019 ordinance intent, and this is what we had talked about, was the sharing of a cooler. You'd still have a solid wall so customers couldn't go between A and B. There'd be a back room, for example, where the employee would have access where they could go into a door and go through the back room and get to the other side. The idea being we were asked to give employees some more potential for security so they didn't have to go through the vestibule to go serve somebody on the other side. Understanding that typically these have, whether they're 2, 3, 4, or 5 unit casinos, they have one employee who's working in all of them, and so they have to move in between. And so that was a concern of theirs. So that was what the intent was when we wrote the ordinance. And then finally, this is just a prototype. It's a fair representation of some of the things that we're seeing now based on the ordinance, which is we have public hallways and openings and with doors where one can move from A, B, C, and D, and you have an employee, for example, in A, and then if somebody's in B and walking over to C, they may not be able to stop somebody from getting alcohol from premise B to D. All of these are separate licensed premises, and alcohol is not to be moving between premises, and that's a concern. And then the open floor plan kind of creates a flow where it just feels like a 40-machine casino, even though on paper it's 4 10-unit casinos.
Thank you, Councilor Neitzer. Just a quick recap. So three things we're seeing is, one is the growth of the size of casinos again, moving into that 20, 30, 40, 50 plus. We don't know exactly where it potentially could go, and so I want to have conversation about clarity and consistency. Secondly, since 2019, we've just been seeing the number of video lottery placements accelerating throughout the community. And obviously third, which is a whole conversation another time for different people's questions remain on how to interpret state law. I think it's just helpful to know that we got people coming to different interpretations. It's just helpful to understand why sometimes we have disagreement, as we have disagreement over understanding the state law piece. And so where do we go from here? From our perspective, there's two potential next steps. Number one is Councilor Neitzer and I are prepared to bring an ordinance forward to cap the number of video lottery establishments in Sioux Falls to be consistent with what we're seeing in the other major cities across South Dakota. That's an option. That's an option for us to consider. Secondly, Councilor Neitzer and I are willing to bring forward some amendments to the 2019 ordinance to try to bring clarity to where we have licensed premises next to each other. And we'd be open to conversation as a council of the best way to amend that ordinance. We don't have a specific, hey, we want to bring this one forward, but we'd be open for conversation and compromise on how to bring that one forward to bring clarity and consistency. Overall today, again, our goal, or my goal at least, is to say, I think every industry in our community, no matter what they are, every industry deserves clear and consistent regulation that gives them security. And the general public deserves clear and consistent regulation as well that they can understand. And at least from my perspective and my observation, we do have some work to do to bring clear and consistent regulation on this front. And so we wanted to present the conversation and say we're open to having further conversation if you're open to it, or if we're living on an island, that may be true as well. I get told that a lot at home, so that may happen as well. But appreciate the opportunity today. We're open for questions, and I believe also there's members from the City Attorney's Office that are here to answer questions as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor McCurris and Councilor Neitzer, for your brief presentation. Great work. All right, who has questions for these two individuals? Councilor Selberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, yeah, I think obviously there needs to be some clarification, especially with the 2019. I mean, it's obviously something, an idea was taken and it's been kind of shaped and been twisted into ways that was not intended. So I think that will be an interesting conversation. When you talk about possibly capping a max number of establishments, do you have a number in mind at this time?
There are, I don't have it in front of me, I think 186 or so, I might be off by one, but I think I'm right, 186 licensed establishments right now, each of which can have 10 machines. And so like if a casino has 30, they have 3 licenses. I think we'd be open potentially to a number, probably somewhere in the territory of where we're at right now. And then, you know, we've talked about there could be a growth factor, you know, with population. Also remembering, once again, this only applies to malt beverage and wine. So anybody with a liquor license, there is no cap. So the Wileys, the Paves, the chain restaurants that buy the liquor license, they can have 10 machines and they can continue to have 10 machines, and every time we award a new liquor license, they can continue to get them. I should mention in other communities, so the way in which it typically will work is that you'll have, with the cap, you'll have essentially video lottery qualified beer and wine licenses and ones that are not qualified, and there'll be 2 lists. So you can still go get a malt beverage or wine license any day of the week, but it just isn't qualified for video lottery. There's a limited number of those, and then you would have a lottery to award any new ones every time you come out with, every time you would hit that population estimate. And we obviously we know how to do that. We've now done that with the cannabis and liquor licenses, where you could use the same lottery mechanism and do a growth factor every 2 years as you estimate population. But
What kind of, I'd imagine you've had a number of conversations with casino owners. What kind of feedback are you getting through this? Are they talking with you and willing to work alongside or have some good suggestions, or how are those conversations going?
And I'll let Councilman McCoris also discuss it too, but I've talked to virtually, I would say, everyone with a major presence in the city at length about this. And in fact, we met with one of the major ones yesterday for well over an hour. So we've had discussions and been open and floated some of the ideas and gotten some of their feedback. Obviously I don't necessarily want to speak to what they would say or not say in terms of what they're for or against, but we've had very open conversations because they're the experts, and we want to find out, what are some of the consequences you think if we go down this road, and some of those other things. And I've also discussed with some other communities their experiences as well. So, yeah, they're open to the conversation, of course, but they want to be part of it.
Well, I appreciate the time and effort you guys have put into this. I know you've been working on it for weeks and weeks, and it is a conversation that needs to be had, and some tweaking and fine tuning does need to be done. So, yeah, I'll be curious to see how we go as it moves forward. But thank you.
Are there any other questions? Counselor Starr.
Thank you. More of a statement. I think one of the things that really changed since 2019 is that I think people who are invested in the industry have a little bit of understanding. The confusion back when we were talking about this in 19 was that a bar owner would call the lottery commission and get one answer, and the lottery commission would say, well, we don't have a problem with that. But they didn't call the Bureau of Alcohol to get alcohol requirements that are different than what the lotteries were, or they didn't come to the city and the city building code requirements, and there was confusion that people were getting answers from multiple different entities, but not all three entities at the same time. So I would say with the work that we did in 19, the good part of it is that we brought that all together, that people understood, or the industry understands, that they need to follow the guidance of all three entities rather than one that gave them the answer that they were looking for. But what we've seen is a large expansion of video lottery in the community. One could make an argument that that's the market driving what we're doing, but at the same time, this is a highly regulated business when the state is involved in a taxing point. And to say this is a voluntary tax, I would argue that over and over again, and we won't get into the legal and the morality parts of the addictive properties of video lottery and what it does to families. So basically, we've kind of gone against the intent of the legislature. We thought we made a compromise in 2019 where we were able to say that, hey, we're willing to get you that expansion to 20 machines. We're willing to do what it takes to maybe bend the intent of the legislature, and we'll make it a little bit easier, because we definitely wanted to look at safety of employees moving machines from one area to the other, to be able to have more access, but it's just not working. And we're at that point, and I'm supportive of whatever we try to do. Adding caps maybe adds now we're back to one of the things we also don't like is putting a value to a license that we're not really excited about. And then the transfer of those licenses and turning that into a whole secondary business of moving things back and forth, and who gets the license and what do you do with the license that's regulated. So I look forward to figuring out a way to say that we're not in favor of more than 20 machines, which is also hard to say. It's kind of hard to say, hey, we don't have a problem as a business owner if you have 20 machines. But that's certainly not the intent of state statute. That's not the intent of the legislature. I was fortunate enough to be there for part of those discussions when video lottery began as an intern. And now I'm an old guy arguing this out, but to be able to hear legislators, not only in caucus, but on the floor, of what they wanted in limited gambling. And this is sure not what they had intended at the thought process. But it was an easy way to raise taxes that people argued didn't affect a lot of people. So again, without trying to stymie the business or killing the golden goose in this process, and lowering revenues to the state, we've got to find a way to rein this back in, is my overall long, windy answer to the what we're trying to do today. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor Starr. Any other questions or comments? Okay, well, we have come to the public comment portion of our meeting. It's speakers are allowed up to 5 minutes each on topics covered during today's meeting. So if you'd like to address us, please come up. Okay, seeing none, we're adjourned.